Hey gang, welcome to another lesson on the use of checklists and specifically the QRH. After the last lesson, I decided what I really wanted to do is to give you some more information on the use of the QRH, its structure and its setup, and give you some techniques and methods of being able to use this. It really does take some time and effort to know this manual and then operate the manual in various procedures and know what other areas that you can go to for some information that's all part of the Quick Reference Handbook. So let's go ahead and get started. And what I'm going to basically cover here is some of the layout and structure of the QRH, an introduction into some of the procedures that I can use as an example of how to go about not only finding them in a quick, efficient manner, but also using the checklist as a crew. Now, the one thing that I want to point out at this point too is that in the QRH, generally in the back section of any QRH at any airline, there are some other sections that really have nothing to do with emergency or abnormal procedures. They may indirectly do that, for instance, in the maneuver section where they would have, let's say you had a depressurization or you had a engine failure at altitude. Things like that are depicted separately as flying the profile that is in the maneuver section. They have a performance section. They have some other sections that are part of a QRH. But what I'm going to cover is strictly the procedural part for emergency and abnormals. Previously, I made reference to this page in the earlier presentation that I had on checklist and the QRH. Now, this particular page is in the forward part of a QRH. And notice it says Quick Action Index. And notice that the QRH is broken into a number of sections based on the area of a system or a condition. So with that, notice that the pages are different. And these are areas and distinctions about a condition that you would easily categorize in your mind. For instance, if you had an engine fire, you don't have to go searching through the index, but this quick action index, you can easily go to engine fire. Now, some of these are basically set up because most of them have some kind of either immediate action item steps that are associated with it, or what they are is important enough that you have some idea of what the description is of what's happening, and you can immediately go to those sections without going to the fire section, which is in section 8, and then look through that section to find that this immediately takes you to it. All of these items here, for instance, notice smoke, fire, and fumes is in section 8, tailpipe fire is in section 8, engine fire, severe damage, and overheat, those kinds of things are all in section 8. And fire, all of these potentially have some overheat or fire condition associated with it. So instead of having to go to those sections and look through to find where the engine overheat is on page 4, you can just quickly go to this quick reference index and go to engine overheat and immediately go to section 8 and go to page 4 and you're at the procedure. This is a very handy and quick way to get to a condition that may come up that you have to address. Now, another portion of the QRH has an index of lights. Throughout the cockpit on the aircraft, there are lights that would illuminate, and notice all of the lights, they're all capitalized. And so with that, these are lights that would be automatically displayed when there's a malfunction in that particular situation. For instance, auto unlock having to do with a cockpit door, a altitude alert. That is a light that would specifically illuminate, and you can go read the light directly, go to the light index, which is a separate portion of the QRH, and you can immediately go to that procedure. And again, notice all of these lights are associated with procedures that are on different pages. So what it allows you to do is a much easier way to go to find for a particular condition that has a light associated with it. And you can see, most of you should be familiar enough to see that battery discharge light is something that is up on the overhead panel and a bleed trip on the pack panel. So this is how you would use this section of the manual. Here is an illustration of a pack that tripped, and it may have not necessarily tripped, but have an overheat associated. But here's how that would work with the light index. You just read on the overhead panel and the air conditioning panel that this light came on in amber, and you can go to the light index and it would immediately take you to the page that has to do with the abnormal procedure for a pack. Now, the other thing that I want you to notice in all procedures, it is important to note the conditions. Now, your airline will maybe have a procedure on how to operate with this. And I've seen in some cases where a manual would specifically say that it is a responsibility to read the conditions. And in other cases, they don't define that, where it's just left up to you. But I would suggest, and again, this is a suggestion, you follow your airline procedure, but it is a very good habit. It's verification. It's part of the verification process that starts with an abnormal. Read the conditions aloud, that both of you can agree that in this case here, that light's on because it's a pack overheat, not the other condition. So that's very important. It's part of the verification process. But this is an example of how a light would come on. I'd go to the light index. I would look under pack. All of these are in alphabetical order, and it would take you to the page. Now, what I'm also going to do is cover down here in this section here where you have a tree. This can be a confusing area when you first start to use the Boeing QRH that your airline would probably have, or their format in some manner that agrees with how the QRH for Boeing is laid out. But in any case, notice that from the previous slide, we came to an area that it says choose one when you got to that point. So you have what's called a tree here. And notice in this situation, what we do is we have three separate areas that we have to determine it applies to the situation once we got to that previous step. So in one case, both pack lights are extinguished. That means what you did above corrected the situation, and then it tells you to continue as normal, and that's the end of the checklist. These dots here continue that you have completed the procedure, and you should be back to normal. Now another would be a single pack light stays illuminated. And then you're going to go through these two steps here to complete the checklist for that particular condition, and then the procedure would be over. And then you have the final condition where both pack lights stay illuminated. Read the note and then go to the next step. Now, the one thing that I think is good technique, and again, comply with your particular airline, but when you get to these trees, read all of them before you decide on one, because remember, this is a verification process. Both of you as pilots should be involved in going through this procedure and in determining what the condition is. So read both. A single pack light stays illuminated, both packs stay illuminated, and between the two of you, you'd say, well, all right, in this condition, both pack lights have extinguished. Or in this condition, both of you would agree, wait a minute, we still have a pack light that is still illuminated. So read all three of these items in that case, and then between the two of you, as part of the verification process, select one that applies and then read the procedure. I touched on this particular procedure in the previous session, but here's a procedure that with an engine, there's a number of different engine conditions you can have where you have an engine fire, or you have an abnormal kind of condition, or an engine seizes and shuts down, or maybe it's just a failure. You're going to have to really determine between the two of you what kind of condition you have. In this case, here, an engine fire is pretty darn obvious, but it also has these conditions that would apply to that same procedure. Now, notice here again, read the conditions. Both of you be involved in one of you reading and the other listening and comprehending which one of these conditions prevails here to put you in that particular appropriate procedure. And then what you're going to do is go through step by step. And in this case here, we've talked about before, you've got some steps here, which is going to involve you confirming the appropriate thrust lever, the appropriate engine start lever before you would actually take the action. Follow your specific airline procedures. The reason that I wanted to bring this up, notice that it's different than that previous condition, but the procedure is very similar. Now, notice that this was an engine failure. The engine just failed in flight. Or you have a situation that is going to lead to a shutdown. For instance, let's say it's low oil pressure and you decide in this situation we're going to shut it down. So this would apply to two situations. The engine just failed on its own, or you have a situation where you are going to shut down an engine. And again, the conditions are important here. Read those and note what really applies to make sure that if it was an engine flame out at altitude or on a climb or on a descent, it's an engine failure, okay? And so what you're going to do is decide which is appropriate, but you're going to follow the checklist. But I really wanted to bring up, when it comes to engine conditions, it comes to hydraulic conditions and flight control conditions, really be careful about determining exactly what the problem is and go to the appropriate checklist. Don't go into a wrong checklist for a condition that you have both verified and identified. Believe it or not, that easily happens at times under stress. As a final point here in this presentation, what I want to point out is some items that are a review of what we've talked about. And again, gang, you're going to get some practice with this as new hires in training. But these are not things that happen all the time. And what we've got to do is put some own personal effort into understanding this manual, understanding your company procedures on how to operate and verify a procedure that you're running in the QRH. But here's some things that I just want to point out that I've brought out before, and I want to reemphasize because they're very important. Number one, when you have an abnormal situation occur or an emergency situation occur that you're going to have to handle something out of the QRH, number one is maintain aircraft control. That's always the primary principle, whether it's a normal situation or whether it is an emergency situation. Again, what I want to suggest and recommend is use the autopilot in these conditions. And I'm putting in here, if possible, there may be some conditions that won't allow you to use the autopilot. It's very rare that I can think of in my own mind, unless you've got maybe a dual hydraulic failure or something of that nature. But in most cases, you should be able to use the autopilot. Now, when it comes to engine failures and shutdowns, I'm going to have a future module on that because getting the airplane trimmed and under control to be able to use the autopilot is very important. And I will go over that in detail, and it'll tie to engine failures on takeoff. It'll tie to engine failures for an approach. So that's going to be an important lesson that I'll have for you in the future. It has a connection with being able to use the autopilot. Have a clear understanding of who's flying the aircraft. I mentioned that earlier. After you identify the problem, you got an autopilot hooked up, or even before that, have a clear understanding of who is responsible for flying the aircraft. That's their primary duty, and it needs to be clarified, and a captain should be making that clarification. As I've said before, and I've said in this lesson, it's important that both pilots agree on what the condition is that you're having to address. That maybe seems simplistic, but it's not. It can get pretty confusing. It's very easy in some cases to go to the wrong procedure even when you've identified it. And one of the things that I'm going to recommend later here is an important secondary and tertiary step for being sure you're in the right procedure. So after you agree what the condition is, find that condition in the QRH. And, we've talked about that indexing and how the QRH is set up to either quickly get there with a quick action or with lights, okay? Read the title of the procedure. Once you get to identify what you want, go to that page and then read the title of the procedure so that you and the other pilot confirm you are in the right procedure. That's where verification begins. I can't emphasize that enough. It's very important. The whole verification process is systematic. Use your airline procedures on it, as I mentioned here. And I capitalize that because it's very important that we emphasize here all airlines are different. And some of them have different ways to handle procedures and protocols that are associated with the QRH. That is your defining direction. What I'm trying to suggest here are just some techniques that hopefully will help. Okay, gang, this ends this portion, this lesson. And one thing that I would like to just add here, just is something that I think is important. I'd like to every once in a while add some of these remarks. When you go through training, whether it is as a new hire or you're involved in a longer term training like a captain upgrade or maybe changing airplanes, make sure you really evaluate where's my personal life such that I'm really ready to have an intense period that I can focus on training. Airlines make an investment in you when they hire you, and they want you to succeed. But if you have conditions like maybe a health problem or a family member having a health problem, or somebody, or you're going through some family situations that are going to be very distracting during a month and a half to 2 months of training, I'm going to suggest that you should let your flight department know, or your chief pilot know, or somebody in that structure of where you are, that you need some consideration for your condition. And it may be something that between you and you decide maybe it's best to put off training to another time until a situation stabilizes. I can't emphasize that enough because I've seen it at times with situations that pilots come in. They know the condition and they've kind of had a pretty good understanding with everybody else outside in their family that they can handle this situation, that it'll be taken care of. But in many other cases, it can't be. And you're going to have that on your mind, and it is not going to be healthy for going through an intense training period. And I don't know of an airline in this nation that isn't going to give you some understanding for your situation and give you the best possible opportunity to succeed, and giving you an opportunity to come into a training situation in a good state of mind. Well, anyway, guy, I hope this is helpful, and I wish you all the best in this career, and may God bless you. And always ask the Lord to be with you as your pilot, not your co-pilot. Before you start every trip, just say, hey, Lord, Please guide me in thought, decision, action, and in execution. Please be the wind beneath my wings. Okay, gang, next time I'll have something else for you.